Welcome back to another episode of the Braun Performance and Rehab Podcast, powered by ISOFIT, Firefly Recovery, and Engage Movement. ISOFIT is my go-to for all things isometric strength training. For more on ISOFIT, be sure to check out isofit.com. Firefly Recovery is the official recovery provider of the Braun Performance and Rehab Podcast. For more on Firefly, be sure to check out recoveryfirefly.com. This episode is also powered by Dr. Ray Gorman, the founder of Engage Movement. Learn how to boost your income without relying on sessions and get a free training on the blended practice model by following Ray Gorman DPT on Instagram. Enjoy. AK, Bri, Rob, welcome back to the podcast. I'm super excited to have the three of you here with me today. For people who aren't familiar with you, would you mind filling in a bit about who you are and all the amazing things that y'all are doing?
My name is Ashley Kowalewski. Go by AK. I don't think I've been known by anything else in the field for a long time. I'm currently an assistant strength coach at Louisiana State University. I've been here. This will be my third year, so it's been a ride. I've spent a lot of time within Division I, Power 4, whatever, Power 5. I don't even know what it is anymore. Strength and conditioning, made stops at Missouri, was at Arizona for a while, was at Michigan before that. Before that was a little bit doing all my internships, everything early on in my career at the Olympic Training Center at the NSCA. So I've been in the space for a while now and just enjoying every single piece of learning kind of what this is as it evolves within collegiate athletics in the context of today and how things have changed. Yeah, in a lot of ways. Outside of just the physical, like all this behavioral stuff, new generation coming in and understanding how to best operate with them and best practices when it comes to really helping our student athletes develop totally, not just physically, but mentally, spiritually, socially, emotionally, all that as well.
Awesome. Yeah, I'm Bri Trudeau. I'm currently getting my PhD in clinical psychology at Eastern Michigan University. And then before that, I was a ski racer for years. I competed Division I alpine skiing at Dartmouth for 4 years. And yeah, prior to that, grew up skiing my whole life. So I kind of can hopefully speak to, the athlete perspective, but also tie in some psychology aspects as well.
What's up, guys? My name is Rob Nelson, and thanks again for having me back on the show. Just for those of you that are not familiar with me, I'm going to my 10th year of coaching, kind of worked in a lot of different sectors. So I've worked in professional sports, Division I, Power 4. I've had my own business at one point, but currently the role that I'm in, I'm an assistant strength coach at Penn State University. I also do some consulting in the professional rugby space, as well as hosting my own podcast. So excited for the conversation today and all the kind of different aspects and different perspectives we have on here.
Absolutely. And I think it makes sense to kind of combine influences from current strength coaches and a former athlete who is now in the psychology space that way, as we try and tackle this kind of concept of the current trends and status from a more psychological perspective of the athletes that we get to work with day in and day out. Because I've certainly seen a shift amongst the athletes that I work with from a private practice, from a PT standpoint that way. And I almost see it as like, I can tell what generation they're in by some of their behaviors and verbiage and some of the other things that they exhibit that way. And I'm not going to say that this is something that applies to every single athlete out there. There's always exceptions, but in general, I've noticed some trends where this kind of like next generation of athletes, if you will, starts ridiculously early on a very specific sport. Maybe that's skiing, maybe that's lacrosse or soccer, whatever it is. They're almost being like bred for that sport, if you will, from such a young age, and that's their like main focus year round. Even there's extremely high rates of like just training in general, to the point where they almost like never know a life without training. There's one girl I worked with who unfortunately tore her ACL at the age of 17, 18 in lacrosse. And she's like, yeah, this is the first time in over 10 years I can remember a life without lacrosse in the picture. So obviously there's just this very high rate of sport influencing their life day to day, but in relation to injury comes a variety of different challenges, from, identification being very focused in the sport, maybe some kind of risk of like anxiety development in relation to re-injury, coming back from that injury and so on that way. But on top of all of that, there's almost this sense of entitlement that I've seen with certain athletes where they say, well, I've put in all the work, I've done all these practices in order to get here. So I feel like I deserve a D1 offer, and I feel like they deserve to pay me $20,000 a year for me to go D1 because look what I've done. Whereas other athletes don't even want to put the work in the first place, and just trying to get them to show up to a freaking physical therapy appointment after a surgery is like pulling teeth. So I see this wide array of things from behaviors and just overall psychological characteristics. And I realize there's a million different ways we can take all of those points that I just outlined that way. But I'm interested to hear you all's thoughts from coaching perspectives, athlete perspective, psychology perspective that way. Is there some kind of transition or shift amongst the athlete mindset that you see now compared to athletes that maybe you worked with in the past? And if so, what are some of those kind of trends or differences that you see with athletes in today's day and age?
Yeah, so kind of a couple of things I jotted down there, Dan. Again, crushing it with the million topics for us to cover here. One of the things that I think about with athletes now is like there's a general lack of problem solving. So that's kind of one of the biggest things that I talk about with my athletes. I kind of just like don't tolerate it, which they hate. I make them solve problems. I make them kind of come up with different things. We have a lot of different like movement challenges in the weight room. So I'll like to give you guys kind of an example. So one of the things is I'll be like, hey, you have to keep like your, lower half, right? So it's like your shins, feet, whatever on the stability ball. And then I need you to like, that's the only like stipulation, but then you have to like basically move from this part of the weight room to this part of the weight room, right? But I don't actually like tell them what to do. I don't like show them an example, that kind of thing. So I'm kind of trying to inherently see what they do, right? And that kind of just drive some of that inherent problem solving that I want to get out of it, right? And a lot of that stuff kind of teach me a little bit more about like what are they strong at, what are they like lacking, a lot of different things. I kind of talked about this last time, Dan, but like with the functional movement screen, it's like this is more of a functional movement screen for me than like kind of other things. So but kind of jumping into that early specialization stuff as well, like I think the biggest thing is I remember for me, I see it both ways. Like I played soccer when I was a kid and I freaking loved it. You know what I mean? It was like everything I wanted to do all the time. Like I was in my living room with a little mini ball, just kicking around all the time. Like you couldn't take me away from it. But the thing that I think was so different, 15, 20 years ago when I was playing was, it's, like I just didn't have I had times of the year where I just wasn't able to. Like there was no summer league team. Like, it was like I played with my high school team in the fall. And then even like at this time I was playing with my club team in the spring and that kind of thing. And so, but like during the winter, like I wasn't doing anything. In the summer, I would go to like camps and do stuff. But a lot of times, like I would just play like baseball with my buddies, or like we would just kind of like go to the park and like play capture the flag, whatever. And I feel like a lot of that stuff inherently is a lot different now, right? Like I worked extensively in the volleyball space, baseball space, softball space, stuff like that. And it's just like, I mean, it's insane. It's just like the amount of time athletes are playing and the volume they're playing and doing stuff. I remember years ago when I was working in the Penguins organization with my high school development teams, it was like, they would come and they would play like 4 or 5 games in a weekend, come back. And it's like, none of these athletes wanted to train. They didn't want to do things. They're exhausted. They didn't want to practice. And it's just, I think the biggest thing and kind of what I'm alluding to with a lot of this too, is I just don't think that a lot of training and practice is very fun anymore, right? It's kind of like this thing where it's like, it's the job and it's like, I have to do it. And there's the mentality. And then you look at college sports now, it's like, okay, it is a job in a sense, right? It's like, I'm going to pay you, to your point, Dan, like I'm going to pay you $20,000 a year to come here. It's like, there's an expectation that I'm like, able to train and do different things. I'm physically prepared from that standpoint. But I think a lot of like our role within all the different perspectives we have here is like, how can we make training a little bit more fun, right? How can we kind of effectively, incorporate problem solving? How can we do different things? How can we make it enjoyable? And not to the point that for me, I mean, I love to train. Like I'm a college strength and conditioning coach. I think everyone who is in the field in some aspect loves to like lift weights and get after and do stuff, but it's, that's not why they came to college, or that's not why they became an athlete, right? So it's like, how can we make our different roles just a little bit more attractive in that way, if that makes sense?
Yeah, no, Rob, I think those are all great points. I think like from my perspective on early specialization in sports, like the environment that we're in these days with youth in sports is so tricky. And I think like from a parent's perspective, it can be really, really challenging when you want your kids to play sports. And everyone around you is, starting their kid in a sport at age 5, age 6. And so I think ultimately it becomes this kind of like rat race where it's like, if I want my kid to be good at a sport, if I want them to, be playing Division I in college, then I need to start them early and I need to specialize them early. And so it's tough to be, that one parent who's like, oh, I'm not going to start my kid early and I'm going to have them play a bunch of sports. But yeah, I think like from the research perspective, there's been a bunch of recent work out there that's shown early specialization in sport results in burnout, overuse injury, people quitting the sport earlier. So I think, the research is there that it's not necessarily the most healthy thing. But in terms of how we change that, I don't really know, because it's such a structural thing in the society that we live in today, that you should start your kids specializing in sports early. And if you don't, then you have no chance at making it, at a high level and being successful.
I'd agree with all of those things, like from both sides. But to me, it's been the biggest thing that I've seen on my side, just not knowing a ton about either way when it comes to, what they have before they get to me. I think what I get the most annoyed about is this concept of like more is better. I think we've done, as professionals in the field, I get so annoyed with the things we tell them, like, oh, hard work beats talent, when talent doesn't work hard. That's the dumbest saying I've ever heard. Like, and we give them the sense of entitlement, right? Like in my mind, like that's what you're telling kids is like, when you work so hard, you're going to outdo all these kids with all this. No, you're not. Like, no, you're not. The people with talent sometimes don't have to work hard. Like, life's not fair, but it is fair because it's not fair for anybody. Like there's that whole, back and forth that I go through in a lot of these things. The whole like going ridiculously hard all the time and not managing loads and not understanding that, like, no, you don't have to play your sport year round to be really good at it. Like, you don't have to go whatever it is. More is not always better. Better is better, right? It's a quality over quantity thing that I think we do a disservice to them when we spout that stuff, or when coaches spout that stuff and don't think about it because it sounds good from a grit mentality, or it sounds good hustle and work and all this stuff that we appreciate. Sure, it's not that I don't appreciate hard work, but there's a time and a place and a structure and a load management system that makes sense that you don't always have time to explain. So when you're telling them and you're having athletes who are coachable and they want to give you their all, can you tell them, can you manage their expectations when it comes to this? Like, here's the goal for this. Or I think that same way with you, Bri, like, I don't know how we across the board communicate this to people. And it's like, hey, we don't have the answer for this, but we know that the research is showing us that early specialization is bad. We know that going hard all year round and not giving yourself a break is going to bury you and put you in a bad spot and potentially increase your risk for all kinds of injuries if you're not already there. And so those are some of the things that I think we can better do on the side of the strength conditioning. Oh, you need to be going in there, and that's where you get grit. That's where you get tough, is in the weight room. Okay, that's where I want to get smarter. That's where I want to get better. That's where I want to actually be able to serve this purpose of, yes, I want you to be able to do hard things. Yes, I want you to know you can do hard things, but I want those hard things to actually be making you better, not harming you or setting you back. And that's one of my biggest things with the athletes that I work with, is that I tell them we have a health over performance mindset. Because if you're not healthy, you can't perform. So if I'm only ever worried about performance and these numbers and increasing all these metrics, I'm not actually serving you, and I'm not helping you at all. So that's the goal in all that, and teaching them that it's okay to ask for help. It's okay to ask when things aren't going well. I'm not going to reprimand you and tell you you're not going hard enough. Like, that's not what this is. It's just a big old education gap. And that's my biggest goal in here, is to educate them and help them, pull them along. And like Rob said, like, add in problem solving. Add in those opportunities for them to think critically about certain things, and not just blindly go in and not wonder, or for them to sit there and wonder why we're doing what we're doing. That's not a thing. I want you to see. I want you to understand how this translates. I want you to understand how this keeps you healthy. I want you to understand how this might make you jump higher, right? But I think all of that circles back to, how do we do it across the board? No idea. But I think it has to start somewhere, and it has to start outside of the money hungry side of AAU and all these travel teams and all this stuff, that understanding that might not be best for everybody.
I think a lot of that too, kind of the one thing that you made me, I was laughing just because that, like, hard work beats talent when talent doesn't work hard. I think that's like in the IMG weight room, or at least it was when I worked there. was like up on that thing, and I always thought that was really funny. But yeah, sidebar. Anyway, but yeah, I think like a lot of the stuff you guys talked about too is just that relationship with challenge, right? So I think that's kind of the thing that, I mean, I talk about this a lot with my athletes, is like, what does that mean to them, right? And I think kind of to your guys' point, like every athlete kind of has a different goal, right? And so like one of the things I think, especially when you see like whether it's at like the lower mid-major, Division 1 or Division 2 or Division 3 or Power 4, like everyone's kind of rhyme or reason is a little bit different for being there, right? So like you have your All-Americans on the team, then you have people who are like inherently like not going to play a lot. That's kind of like how the system works, right? So I think a lot of times too, like it really goes back to like what the environment you're making ends up being the most important thing. And like, AK, like a lot of stuff that you said, I agree fundamentally. I'm not real big into like, the mental toughness is creating the weight room and doing stuff, but I do think that like one of the things that I really try to do with my athletes is kind of just make a like very natural bond with them, like outside of just strength conditioning, right? So it's like I know a lot about their personal lives and their families and just like stuff that they like to do. I mean, music's always an easy segue with people and that kind of stuff from that standpoint. But I just think like from the standpoint, like if you're looking to effectively, try to avoid the burnout, right? And you're trying to avoid like overdoing things and stuff like that, you kind of have to meet athletes where they are. And I think like one of the things that I've noticed, at least in the last 5-6 years when I've been Division 1, has been, like you just have such a different relationship with challenge. You have such a different investment level from person to person, right? And then even like some teams are more invested than others, right? And when I say invested, I mean like they're really like putting time into the process and doing different things. And that's okay, right? I think that's kind of one of the things that I think a lot of strength coaches, at least that I've seen, like they really try to like not meet their athletes where they are, right? They kind of like try to be the guys who are on the sideline, just like overdoing it, bringing the juice and doing stuff like that. And like, for me, it's like, it's junk, right? Like if you talk about like authentic positivity or confidence, like this is fake, right? It's being built up for you, right? It's not actually real from that standpoint. So sorry, there's just a lot of random tangents here, but that's all I'm going to say. But yeah, appreciate it.
But I agree with you, right? Like I 100% agree with you when it comes to the fact of like, I want connection as a result of authenticity, not because I have to prove something to you. I have nothing to prove to you, I promise. And if you step into the weight room and you never jump higher, like, first of all, I probably haven't done my job all that well, but you come in and you're more confident and you move better and you're out of pain and you feel good doing what you're doing, we've made progress. So I think there's a lot that goes on in this field of just like, it has to be some kind of flex. Well, my athletes can out squat your athletes. I don't really give a shit if we're going to beat you in a game. I don't care. Like, I do not care. Mine are healthy, right? I want them to be pain free. I want them to go through movement patterns. I have some that'll never throw a barbell on their backs ever, as a result of they just cannot. Does that mean I can't teach a back squat? No. We don't Olympic lift. Does that mean I can't teach a clean? No. And, like, I've had people come at me all kinds of different ways for things that I don't do, and that's fine. I don't mind. Like, that's okay. Because at the end of the day, what I want to teach them is that their voice matters. And when they tell me certain things of, hey, this bothers me. Hey, catching that clean, oof, like, really don't like that. What do? Do we hammer it home? Because like, that's the only way I know how to do things. No, we're going to adapt. We're going to adjust and we're going to move forward because that's the way that, again, problem solving, right? That's what we're here to do. And I think that across the board, like when it comes to meeting them where they're at, am I willing to walk it back or progress it on past where I thought, because that's maybe where they are? Am I willing to put in the work of having 4 different programs running and having to ask for more help on the floor because I've got 4 different programs running? And that, I think that's a whole nother aside and a whole nother thing that we can not talk about. But that's kind of where I'm at in the same way that it's goals, it's challenging, it's problem solving, it's meeting people where they're at and connecting as a result of authenticity, because then you actually impact somebody's life and you can actually help them change behaviors and have them want to be around you, not dread seeing you every time because you're going to scream at them at 6 o'clock in the morning.
One of the things that comes to mind for me just listening to all this is I think for the longest time, I operated with my college athletes from a rehab standpoint under the assumption that they're developed because they're an adult. They're a college athlete. When in reality, I'm only going to cite what I believe is correct scientific literature. If I get this a little bit wrong from the timeline standpoint, please don't come at me too hard. This is not my specialty, but I believe the prefrontal cortex in the brain is responsible for some of these higher level functions that we've discussed so far, from decision making to impulse control to overall planning and so on that way. And I believe that kind of like executive function of the brain is not fully developed until someone is in their like mid to late 20s. So if I'm looking at my 18 to 19-year-old college athlete and expecting them to be at that fully developed standpoint, I might not even be there myself, right? I just turned 27 last year. I'm just now getting to that point. So I think one of the big things is for us to understand where they're at from a psychological development timeline standpoint. And then you all brought up some of the different factors that might influence that, right? Like you mentioned early sports specializations. You mentioned some of the different things that unique athletes have gone through themselves that way, different challenges they might have faced, right? Each athlete is different. One of them might have grown up in poverty and maybe in a split family household, and another might have grown up in a life of luxury. Those two are not the same. They're different because of the experiences that they've gone through thus far. We can't treat them one and the same. We have to treat them differently, but those different experiences have taught them different things from a developmental standpoint. And as a result, because they're different people, our approaches to intervene with them with that psychological mindset have to be different because they each need different things, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, I think that makes a lot of sense. I mean, speaking from an athlete's perspective, and I'm sure AK and Rob, you guys have, you've seen this from a different perspective as well, but just being in the gym, within our own team, we had a lot of variation in, where people were in their development and how they approached training and, how they handled injury. But I think what was maybe even more significant was the variation among teams. So, lifting and doing our conditioning in the gym with other teams was always really fascinating. And I think it was cool to talk to our strength and conditioning coach, who had, our team and, 3 or 4 other teams too, to kind of see how she would approach, differences in where we were, not only at our physical development and our background with lifting and everything, but also kind of, the expectation, the mental expectation thus far at that point in our career development. And I think, it changes too between, within genders in sport, within different teams, like, for in ski racing, and I think this is probably true of most sports, like women are, tend to peak earlier. And so kind of this expectation that there's a timeline for you, I think that changes things. And I think personally for me, that was a huge, factor in maybe why, like when you guys were talking about how do we, get athletes to slow down and take their time and not burn out and not rush through injury and stuff. Thinking about my own experience, looking back, I'm like, yeah, what would have, made me kind of chill out a little bit in the gym and not rush things. And I don't know, because I think when you're in that place as an athlete, there is kind of this, time ticking in your head. Like this is my window to achieve, I'm supposed to be at my peak. And so I think that's tough too. You want to be pushing as hard as you can to be able to achieve as much as you can within, your this kind of imagined window of success.
I think there's so much to be said about that, right? Like not only the success of like your sport, but I've had to put it this way to a couple of athletes in the not so recent past that like, what about life? Like, do you want to be able to squat and I don't know, sit on the toilet? I don't know, like I think about little things like that. Like, do you want to be able to sit down? Or is it more important that you squat 600 pounds, right? Is it more important to you that your back doesn't hurt in a few years, or that, again, you have some kind of flex that you're able to do whatever thing, right? And then I think about it the same deal. I know that I competed. I broke my back, right? I fractured my back. I through shoulder injuries. Like there was a long time, my ponytail always goes to the right, because there was a long time I couldn't get my right arm any higher than this. Now, me going back, I would not have done a thing differently. I had a phenomenal career. I loved it. I loved my coach. I loved everything about it. But I suffered the consequence of losing my right, like losing a lot of range of motion in my shoulder for a long time. I was able to rehab it. We're good. We're great. We're wonderful. But knowing that, I think having the opportunity to choose to me is big. And knowing all the facts, right? Or knowing that, I mean, there are people, you can go look as far as women go, right? Yes, there is like, when you look at like gymnastics and skiing and some of the acro type movements, they do tend to peak earlier, right? You see a lot of the Olympians that are just very, very young, but then go look at other sports, right? We have a lot of basketball, volleyball, softball, 30s and 40s. These women aren't peaking until much later in life. And Dan, to your point, like our brains don't stop developing until we're 25, 26. Like that prefrontal cortex is not all there. And then I think it goes through a lot of the other processes. Dan, you and I talked about this in our chat, that there is a annular singular cortex, but that it basically is our ability to like overcome doing hard things, and it grows in our brain, like, and they've like tied that with the will to live. Like there's like a whole another form of research that's talking about restraint and like tying things in, doing difficult things, right? When we do things we don't want to do, that's a whole nother conversation. But I think that when we present the athletes with the facts of like, hey, here's what I want from you. I want you to be healthy. I want you to be available. I want you to play the sport as long as you possibly can. How do we do that? Right? In a way that is safe and that makes sense. And I think that the physical is just one small piece. And the physical will not, in my mind anyway, the physical won't be outdone, or I'm sorry, the physical will be outdone by the mental almost every time. Because for me, like I was willing to push through pain. I was willing to push through discomfort. I was willing to push through whatever it was, because I knew I didn't have there was no after for me. There was no long game plan. There was no Olympics for me. There was no post collegiate throwing. I was going to be done. So I took that and I knew, okay, cool, I'm done. But those that want to play longer and want to have a career in the post collegiate, all that stuff, I think it's just important that we present them with the facts. And we approach it like that. Hey, I want to let you play this sport as long as you can. Here are the things I know will help keep you available for longer. And sometimes that means we hang up our ego when we lift, or we hang up our ego when we train. And that can be a hard thing to hear, instead of having somebody over here in the strength and conditioning world that just wants to yell at you and make you, well, you need to jump higher and you need to be faster and you need to be stronger. Do you, or do you need to move better? Like, and you need to be more sound, and you need to make sure that you're available to play. Athlete availability is, in my mind, the most important metric. I don't care how much you squat. I don't care how far, I don't care about any of that stuff. I care that you're available to play the game.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I like what you said at the end there too, like about availability. That's like one of the things I'm trying to get into this year with one of my teams, is just availability profiling. So it's more of scaling things, right? So strength and conditioning, like 1 to 5, where you at every single day, practice environment where you at 1 to 5 every single day. And then I just like that concept, because I remember sitting in a meeting here, and it was kind of like we were talking about injuries at the school. And it was like, have injuries gone up, gone down? It's just like injuries that are being reported, right? So it's like basically up to your athletic trainer to report them. It's like, are they reporting more? They're reporting less. This is a new software. There's all these different factors. I was like, yeah, again, like this is subjective by nature, right? Like it's impossible to objectively measure some of these things. But I was like, if we could implement something like this with the scaling, it's like you could do it like beginning to the semester, end of the semester, fall average, spring average, year average, right? You look at these things where it's like, okay, like when I'm now like objectively, like looking at your performance within our space as the support staff, it's like, now we have things to look at, right? Now again, like it's not perfect, right? It's my, 4 or 5 is different than someone else's, 3 or 4 or whatever. I think there's more of a framework that I'm working on to build some of those things out. But I do think that stuff is like really important. And to your point, I agree. I think it is the most important metric that we really have. Kind of jumping back to what Dan was talking about before too, with like the brain development, just kind of got me thinking. So like a little bit about my background, I'm really into like what's called ecological dynamics, if you guys aren't familiar. So more like a skill acquisition theory, and then how do we apply that to sports performance, right? So how do we kind of look at that, or practice design and that kind of thing? So, we were talking about how like athletes, and it was funny, like you mentioned, it's like, oh, I assume this athlete is developed, right? And it's like, I remember my first D1 job, I was like, is this D1? I was like, is this for real? I mean, because I didn't play college sports, right? It's one of those things I probably could have gone like D2, D3, that kind of thing. I was like, I actually did some study abroad, and I did some traveling and stuff, which I loved. And I'm really happy I did that. But I remember being like, man, like when I was in high school, it's like, if you were going D1, it was like, you were like the big dog, you know what I mean? Like you were developed, like you were him or her, you know what I mean? Like you were the person. And so like, it was just, and again, a lot of like, it was like just a lot of people in my high school did do that. Right. So it was just kind of like that big milestone to kind of achieve. But I think one of the other things kind of jumping into this though, for me, is like just the concept of like the way that we frame skills, right? So when we talk about development and doing different things, like I think there's a context specific thing, right? So like you look at like some of these like really like all-time great people, and it's just like they're amazing problem solvers, right? And they've been doing it at the highest level for a really long time. So it's like, I think a lot of it too is like when you get that Division I athlete, or you get that athletes that kind of go into college for the first time, like they have a new set of problems that they have to learn how to develop, right? So, like again, I am not super heavily involved in recruiting. As someone who isn't involved in recruiting, I think it's really interesting. So I think it's really interesting to look at like how athletes are like picked, right? So it's like, the age old time when you talk to people about recruiting, it's like you take kids who are like, really good at the level they're at, or kids who are maybe not as good, but they play at a higher level, right? It's kind of that, like, what do we do, from that standpoint? And for me, again, my opinion doesn't matter because I'm just a strength coach, but, my opinion about that specifically, that was like, I would take the higher level, right? Because it's like they're playing in a level that's already similar to what they're doing at college. There's probably a little bit less of a gap to kind of develop that. Now, the other thing, and then this is just my opinion, so take it with a grain of salt. I think a lot of times, like within the training environments that a lot of people have, there's not a lot of correlation between like direct perception or that kind of athlete environment relationship, or that perception action coupling, a lot of these different things that are inherently involved, right? So we talk about development, it's like, okay, yes, like my brain is not developed, but also my inherent skill that in my opinion is going to be like seen among like top performers and people who are actually like inherently really, really good at their sport is probably not being developed at any point, right? Because if you look at like, traditional training or, survivorship bias, it's like, training, I've trained this way because my, sport coach from 20 years trained this way. And a lot of it isn't like modernized. It's not a lot of like, theory behind it. I would argue there's not really like any kind of thing behind it, just kind of like, hey, we just done this way. So it's again, like now, like, let's just say they are in an environment, right, where they are actually like looking at perceiving, acting, focus of attention, like all these different things that we like know from an ecological dynamics perspective are going to be really helpful. It's like, yeah, my brain's not even like fully developed, but it's like, I've also never done that before. Right. And I think to like be functioning at the highest level from that standpoint, be successful, you need to be good at those things. Right. So I'm kind of already behind the 8 ball on that perspective as well. Right. So when we talk about development, how do we kind of introduce those things earlier? How do we kind of do that stuff is going to be really important.
Yeah, Rob, that's interesting. I wasn't super familiar with the ecological dynamics theory, which it's actually related to the theory that is my thesis is based on, which is dynamic systems theory. So I think it's fascinating to think about that in the context of sports and in college, and how, I don't know, I guess one of the main like principles of this theory is that basically like a system or an individual, changes in response to their environment, but we seek out these kind of like attractor states, or these states that are comfortable for us. And really the only way to see an individual's full range of behavior is to like perturb this system, or to like put them in an environment that really pushes them and changes them. So that's fascinating to think about in the context of sports and in college sports.
Now you're speaking my language. I won't bore everyone in the audience, but I was like, I could talk about attractor states and attractor theory and, dynamical systems for hours. So I won't do that, but I'd love that.
Well, building off that topic just a little bit, I mean, AK's brought it up a number of times here about how there's certain individuals that just want to go to the gym and throw weight around to be able to say they throw weight around. I am sometimes one of those individuals, especially when it comes to pull-ups. I like being the guy that can literally throw a person on his back and rep pull-ups. I don't know what it is. I can't explain it, but it's just how I am. From an attractor state standpoint, if you put me at something that I'm really, really bad at, I don't want to be known as the guy who's like awful at handstands. I still haven't figured out handstands, can't quite get up on my hands. I don't know how y'all make it look so easy. It's just not something that really like has ever really agreed with me. But that's something that makes me rather uncomfortable, at least being the guy in the gym that really sucks at something, especially in front of a large group of people. However, for my own development, those things that I'm bad at are probably the things that are going to get me closer to where I need to be in the long run. Doing more of the same stuff that's comfortable and in a very attractive state for myself probably aren't going to move the needle any closer to where I need to be or where I want to be, as opposed to the things that I know I'm bad at and I actually need to improve upon. There's that kind of theory that you're only as strong as your weakest link at the end of the day. And unfortunately, the weak things tend to be the ones that break. So if we're not exposing people to those stimuli, whether that be in a physical sense or a psychological sense, ultimately, that's going to be the thing that breaks them down long term. On top of that, I feel like a lot of that comes into this concept that I know Bri and I have chatted about at length in the past in relation to delayed gratification. Like I think of the like cookie, marshmallow, pretzel, whatever the heck it was test, where essentially they saw that kids that were able to restrain from some kind of stimulus in front of them, whether that be a cookie or whatever, for a longer period of time, did better later in life on a variety of different things from a health standpoint and beyond. And in relation to physical training like this, like going back to my handstand example, I know that I'm not going to get good at the handstands immediately. So that's one of the things that makes me not want to do it, because I know it's going to take a lot of time and energy and effort, and it's probably going to be months, if not longer, before I figure the thing out, because I'm a bit of a motor moron. So why do I want to commit to that when it's going to be hard, it's going to be difficult, it's going to be all these things that I don't necessarily want to do, when in reality, again, those are the things that are actually going to provide the most for us. Those are the actual hard things. You know, the hard things are not just as simple as throwing more weight on the bar. Sometimes it's being comfortable enough with yourself to do the things that you're bad at in front of other people in relation to your overall long-term development.
The thing that I lead with at the beginning of our off season, especially, is like failure is not a problem. Like, and the thing that I led with this last year with volleyball specifically was, I want you to know how to fail and not quit. Like you're going to come up against pieces of that your entire life, that you're going to be bad at something. Like it's just where it is. You're going to fail. You're going to have those pitfalls, those downfalls, those things that you really don't like. For me, I mean, you mentioned handstands. It's the bench press. I have never been good at it in any way. Push-ups, whatever. Fine, no problem. Barbell bench. I hate it. I hate it so much. And I throw it in my training. I also hate to run. I hate running more than anything, and I make myself do it every day. And it's just, it's that mental, even if it's 10 minutes, like I just legitimately hate it. And I'm not bad at it. I'm actually pretty good at it. I just hate it. But there are those things that I know, and I know how to have failure. I know how to have goals that I fail at, right? And I know how to have things that push me and motivate me outside of myself. But that's what I think. I don't know. I'm interested to hear y'all's perspective on this. But I think that's the thing, is that making failure not final. Like you can't making failure definitive, right? Or making you think that because you can't do something that it devalues you or it makes you unworthy or whatever. There are a lot of things like that in this life, and in falling in love with processes instead of results. And because if you can stay in love with the process, that can benefit you longer, then yay, we won the championship. Like we won the national championship in baseball last week. Now what? Like next, like what, did that end? Was that the pinnacle of your life? Like, I hope not. I want to do another thing. That's a great spot in your life. But next, had you not won the national championship, that would have sucked. That would have been a failure in some people's eyes. But does life end right there? No, it doesn't. I hope not. Right? I don't want to quit. I want to come back next year and be on the same stage and do the exact same thing. So falling in love with the process and being process oriented and learning how to grind and go through that and do difficult things and push through it benefits us just as much, I think, as the delayed gratification, because that's essentially what it is.
Yeah, AK, I think those are all really great points. I think speaking about this from like maybe a shift that we're seeing in sports, and maybe a little bit more from the psych standpoint, Dan, I mean, these two things are really important for, success in athletes. And AK, you just touched on that, like A, delayed gratification, and B, like just being comfortable being uncomfortable. And I think these are two things that, the way that our society is kind of changing has, specifically, in my opinion, I think there's some research, quite a lot of research out there too, but with, the kind of like boom of social media, we're seeing people like a massive epidemic, in my opinion, of like this avoidance of emotion and avoidance of discomfort. And so I think that, is definitely starting to affect athletes. Like we're just not comfortable sitting in uncomfortable situations. I think the classic situation I always think about is, you sit in a waiting room at the dentist or at a doctor's office and everyone pulls out their phone because we're just not comfortable sitting, alone in silence without, scrolling and seeing something, having some sort of stimulus to look at. And then, from the delayed gratification standpoint, I think social media also kind of is playing into this too, in that we have, TikTok and Instagram and YouTube Reels and stuff. And, I think it's really impacting both our attentional capacity, but also our ability to kind of wait for these like longer, bigger rewards. We're so used to having these like smaller, immediate dopamine hits through the like shorter videos. Like, we went from YouTube, we were watching 30-minute YouTube videos, or even before that, Netflix. And now it's like our attention span is, 15 seconds and then we're bored. And so I think that kind of shift in society is affecting these, major qualities that are important for athletes to be successful.
Yeah, a lot of great points you guys had. Your example to Dennis, I think that's funny. Like when I'm in the waiting room, I always feel like if I just sit there, well, not on my phone, like I'm the psychopath, right? Like it's kind of like everyone has their phone out. So if you're just staring there, like into the abyss, people are like, this person is a psycho murderer. Like, why does he not have his phone out? From that standpoint. But I try to bring books and like whatever. But anyway, sidebar. Yeah. So I agree with that too. I think a lot of it too is like society's just built towards like comfort, right? So it's like, okay, I'm at work now, but I go home. It's like realistically, it's like I could have food delivered to me. I could, I really don't like need to like leave my house for like multiple days. Like anything that you could possibly come up with, it's already been invented. My friend in college, he was real big into the idea of like designing apps and doing stuff. And we kind of brainstormed. It's like, what do people want? And I was like, well, people want to work less hard, right? So we came up with all these things, and everything that we came up with, it was like someone already invented it. It's like, you want somebody to do your laundry for you? They will. You want somebody to do this, like that kind of thing. It's like, and and there's a lot of money in that, right? Because it's like, again, it's like, I don't want the challenge, and it's like, it's kind of sad, and I've fallen victim to this as well, right? But it's kind of sad to the point where it's like people like aren't willing to embrace like just the normal challenges of everyday life, right? It's like, I don't want to get in my car, drive for 2 minutes to pick up food, so I'm going to spend $15 more, have it delivered to my door, right? So I don't have to get out of like the same clothes I've been wearing for 4 days. I haven't showered since how long? This is not about me specifically to anyone listening, but just the hypothetical from that standpoint. But yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of really interesting like stuff there. I think a lot of it for me is like redefining failure, right? So when we look at that, it's for me, I always just like try to keep my athletes on this like exploration and learning environment focus, right? So much of like what we do is, like if we don't succeed at something right away, it's kind of like, okay, like how can we use that as an opportunity to improve, right? It's like, what are the things that we need to work on? What can we get better at? But then also on the kind of flip side of things, it's like, I think a lot of like you guys kind of alluded to this, but a lot of times like so much of like practice design and sports and stuff, it's like people want it to look pretty, right? It's kind of like this, like, hey, like the reps got to be perfect. Practice has to be perfect. If practice is perfect, we're going to play well and do all these things. And like, for me personally, I think there's a lot of research for this, just like inherently not true, right? You talk about like the challenge hypothesis or challenge theoretical framework from that standpoint of like, if it's not hard enough, we're not actually improving from that standpoint. But also from the same standpoint too, it's like, how am I really going to get better, right? And then you can even take it a step further of like, how specific or, how relevant is this practice design or representative if we're succeeding 100% of the time, right? If I'm just doing glove work or if I'm doing these things that are kind of removed from different standpoints, it's like, realistically, it's like, hey, we've, decomposed the tasks of practice. We've never really brought it back together to kind of represent the whole game as a whole from that standpoint. But kind of to one of your points too, Dan, like I just want to talk real quick about like the rate limiter theory, right? So when we talk about, it's like, what do I really need to improve on? So I think this is one of the things when we talk about that, because it can be really overwhelming, right? It's kind of like, hey, this is like what I'm really good at these things, right? And I actually think that like in super high level sports, it's a lot different than like lower level, right? Because it's like, there's so many things that I can prove on, right? But then it's like, you take guys in the NFL, NBA, like WNBA, like all these really high like level athletes. And it's like, hey, like they're so good at what they do, right? So like their rate limiters are inherently a lot smaller, right? But then it's like, I look at like my softball athletes that I work with, and it's like, okay, like when I have that conversation with them and our coaching staff, like one of the things I like to do is just kind of like start with the most sport specific example they can give me. It's like, hey, like what do they need to get better at, right? And if it's like a physical thing, right? It's like, well, their first couple steps off the bag are pretty slow. Or it's like, we just need them to steal more. Or like, what do we need as a team? It's like, hey, we need to hit more, balls to the gap or whatever ends up being. It's like, okay, like now let's just like decompose that, right? From a standpoint of like, okay, like what does that mean from a physical standpoint? What does that mean from a sports medicine standpoint? What does that mean from kind of like the whole front office and getting everybody involved to kind of like, problem solve these tasks and look at a lot of that stuff. And that's going to kind of give you a lot of things, right? Because the other thing too is it's like not everything. I mean, I'm sure there's some people that argue with this with me, but it's like not everything is a physical limitation, right? It's not like, oh man, like the weight room is going to solve all of my problems. It's like, I mean, I gave this example, I think, on a different podcast, but I used to work in baseball, and one of my guys, like he was training, like mobility was up, strength was up, like everything, like this kid was literally doing everything right, and his batting average was down, right? So it's like, you tell me what I could have done better, from that standpoint. I was training a lot different than I am now and I obviously have some different ideas that I would kind of like work with, but it's like what I have done theoretically to make this kid a better baseball player, right? It's like, I mean, just hit the damn ball. You know what I mean? Like, that's really like what you need to be better at from that standpoint. So I think a lot of it is kind of like looking at what is that specific quality you need to look at. And then if it isn't a physical thing, right? If it's not a physical attribute, it's like a psychological thing, or, it's an emotional thing, or just like a stress in your life. It's like, even still, like, you have the resources and people to kind of like problem solve those things and kind of work together. I think that's going to be the most like beneficial outcome to that specific problem.
I think what we see, to speak just off of that briefly, in collegiate athletics, to me, is stress. Like, what is stress? Is it their first time away from home? Like, there are all these things. Did their boyfriend break up with them? Did they have a weird test? Did they fail something? Whatever. Was there money available and now there's not? Or there's all these things that, like, stress is stress and training is stress. So it's all the same. And so all of these numbers and metrics that we test, and all, like, to your point about the performance metrics with this baseball player, your metrics can be up and you can still be playing like trash. Your metrics can be the lowest they've ever been in your career and you can be having the game of your life. And it speaks to so many different things. And I think the approaches can be wild. And I'm so interested to hear across the board, like, as we continue to develop this field, like, how we approach those things differently. Because I tell my athletes all the time, like, how strong do you have to be a volleyball player? There's not really an answer, right? Like, you can go off of historical data, sure, like, whatever you want to say, but they all look different. They all move differently. They have different sets of genetics. There is no one perfect looking example, right? It's because it's how they play the game. And so what am I doing to best serve that athlete and how they play the game? What am I doing to give them every advantage that makes them better at how they play the game, right? Just because a girl is whatever, maybe she's slow, you speed her up. What if it throws her sequencing off and now she's trash, right? What does it look like? And I don't think there's any one answer to that, but that's what that brought to mind immediately, is just making sure that we're using what we know to actually create some kind of benefit with these athletes and make them better at their sport. Because I think at the end of the day, the metrics that we test, and if those fall short, but everything else is going well, like, I have to swallow my pride a lot of the time and be like, all right, cool. Like, something's going right and I need to find out what that is.
Building off that concept of stress a little bit, the first sport that comes to mind for me is actually ski racing, because for those that are unfamiliar with it, you usually have to wake up ridiculously early in the morning to get to the mountain. There's a lot of prep work involved, from tuning your skis to waxing them to the correct temperature of the snow, and then trying to adjust that if for some reason that stimulus changes. Then on top of that, knowing that although you get practice runs to inspect the course, depending on what number you draw, the course could look drastically different, especially if you're the last one to race down that mountain. And oh, by the way, this is not something that you just get to, oh, we're going to play that team again later on. It's like, this could be your one shot at that. And there's a few other sports that are like that as well. But ski racing is the initial one that comes to mind that way. And with that, Bri, I'm interested to hear, how did you kind of go about responding to the stresses that were associated within your own sport that way for ski racing? And what kind of things, knowing what you know now from a psychological standpoint, might you be willing to kind of like do differently if you were kind of like in the same situation again?
Yeah. I mean, looking back on it, I am not sure if I responded to it in the most healthy way. I feel like, as you mentioned, it's one of those sports where there's so much variation and so much prep work, which there is in, every sport. I think that part of what makes skiing really hard is you're fighting for like hundredths or tenths of a second. Like, to share a quick little snippet, like, the difference between me qualifying for the national team one season was literally the difference of 3/100ths of a second. So that's like nuts. And so I think when you're dealing with such short amount of time, and then, you're fighting for, I don't know, basically the prep work is ridiculous. I think ultimately the burnout rate in skiing is really high, because as much work as you're doing, you may hit like a perfect run every, I don't know, 1 out of 10 runs, maybe 1 out of 100 runs, probably more realistically. And so it's really frustrating when you're putting in all this effort and you're not really seeing that consistent reward or output. And I think it's also interesting that you're training with your teammates, but then at the end of the day, you're competing against your teammates when you get into races. And so that's kind of a unique aspect too that I think adds a little bit to the stress level. In terms of, what I did, I think one of my best seasons, to be honest, and like this kind of ties into some psychological aspects as well. I was meditating every day for 20 minutes a day. And I did that for, I think, about a year. And that kind of, coincided with a time where I felt really at peace with, I don't know, kind of, where I was in the sport. And, I was it was much easier for me to move on from hard days or challenging days. I think the way that I interacted with my teammates and my coaches was a lot better. I think sleep was another big thing that was really important for me in managing stress. A little bit harder to do in college when I had a lot of things on my plate. But yeah, I think, looking back on it, it's hard. It's hard when you're an athlete and you're in it to have that perspective, to know like, okay, it's just a sport, because ultimately, like, it's not just a sport when you're in it, right? Like, it's your whole identity, it's your whole life. And it's when people tell you that on the outside, I think it can feel, it's not very validating to hear somebody like, why are you so upset? It's just a silly little sport. Or it's just one race, or it's just one run. When in reality, like your entire life and, your whole, college focus or whatever has been put into, being good at this sport. But I think when you're ultimately done with the sport, that's kind of where this perspective comes in. You're like, wow, like it was one race or one turn or whatever. And so I think finding little ways to, remember what matters outside of the sport and kind of figuring out your identity is important to manage that stress too. Because I think that it's tough when you're really in it as an athlete to see that and to see what's on the other side.
Just kind of jumping on that too, like to the end part of that, I think that's really like powerful and important. Like, I was actually talking about this with one of my old head coaches, so I'm really good friends with still, and just kind of like about appreciating the process. So I think like so much of it, like in my experience in doing stuff, like I've been fortunate to actually be somewhat successful, right? I've worked with a lot of kind of successful teams and done things, which has been really cool, but it's always kind of like very short-lived for me, right? Maybe it's just like my personality or whatever it ends up being, but it's kind of like, it feels really good in the moment. Like you're holding the conference championship trophy, you're holding the national championship trophy or whatever it ends up being, like from that standpoint for each person. But it's kind of like, at the end of the day, it's like you go back into work on Monday and you're just kind of right back to the drawing board, right? You're kind of doing that. So I think for a lot of people, it's really kind of like, how do you set yourself up to enjoy that process? Like enjoy the people you're around and kind of doing those things. Cause like at the end of the day, like I think it is really cool to do that. But like to your point, like so many of the athletes now and so many people, I mean, always like, especially now, it's like so much of like their identity is tied to, their sport and doing things. And like, it's like, I'm successful as a person if I'm successful in my sport. And right, you kind of draw those things back and forth. And kind of like what we were talking about before too, like jumping back to that topic a little bit is like, it's hard to separate those identities, right? It's hard to separate like, oh, I'm the power hitter on the team, right? It's like, I'm the best DH in the country. I mean, it's like, this is who I am, like that kind of thing. And then it's like hard to separate that from a training standpoint. It's like, well, I need to continue to do these things to do that, right? Because if I don't do that, then it's like, who am I as an identity? It's like you lose the layers, right? Kind of just like everything kind of steamrolls downhill, pun intended here with the skiing analogy, but it's just like all that stuff kind of ends up being really important, right? And so I think just kind of reflecting on that is really important. I think like that's just pretty cool. So sorry.
No, I was going to say, I think that's a great point, bringing up, to go back to the point about identity. There is a joke, I think this probably happens in other sports too, but it's like, how long post retirement from college sport is it going to take before you like sign up for a marathon? And I think there really is this drive as an athlete. Like, you don't know what to do with yourself when you're done with your sport because we're so tied to it. And we're stuck in that mentality of I wake up and I train and that's what I'm used to. But yeah, I think there are ways to kind of find your identity outside of the sport in a way that's healthy, and that you can still have that passion in the sport. I also think this kind of relates to our previous conversation, Dan, about like the importance of having that like intrinsic drive in the sport. And I think that's really where you see this burnout, is when people are fueled by those external reinforcers and rewards. And, that's where this process piece comes in. Like if you really enjoy the process and, you have that intrinsic motivation and you love it because of, all the little things, that's, I think the most healthy way to approach a sport.
And just to speak on, I mean, that I agree with all of those things. To me, the biggest thing is giving you skills. As my thing that I really want is I want to give you skills for the rest of your life. Like we hit problem solving earlier. Yes, we hit, dealing with difficult situations, being uncomfortable, having hard conversations, or being able to admit, hey, I don't like this, or speaking up and speaking your mind and saying things in the moment. Hey, that hurts me, and not being afraid of your teammates, oh, like, well, she just doesn't want to do this. She's not working hard enough, whatever. Or having those conversations with your teammates like, hey, no, actually, I am working really hard. That's not something that's for my body. Right. And advocating for yourself and advocating for other people and learning how the athletes. And I think a lot of the thing that I have is I have a group of athletes that are very intertwined and very close knit together. To where when like one is kind of struggling, like we're all struggling. I'm like, no, that's not like, sorry, we can't operate that way, right? Because if one person goes down, we got to have somebody else step up, and we got to go, and we got to, step up, step in and go. And it doesn't mean you can't empathize with people, but that's another tangent, not going to go down. But giving them skills, right, to go about those things and to look inside and to find that internal motivator, or to find that drive, because that at the end of the day, it's just you and yourself in your head, right? Coach isn't in your head. Your teammates aren't in your head. Nobody's going to be able to get to you like you can. So when you can sit there and build out that confidence and build out those things for you, whether that's in the weight room, on the court, pre-practice, post-practice, whatever it is, I think that's a skill acquisition process that will help you for the rest of your life. It doesn't really matter what you do. If you're able to do that for yourself in the moment and in the really difficult moments, then that thing, again, is just like training. Eventually it's easier for you over time. And I think, like you talked about with meditation too, that's hard. Meditating is hard. I'm not good at it either. I'm not good at being quiet. I'm not good at sitting peacefully and quiet, but I've been working on it and trying. And it's the same deal with my running. Do things you don't like to do because it does make you better. There is science behind it, right? You can go read. There's a ton of books. Altered Traits is one of my favorite ones that talks about the value of meditation. And I'm gonna end that one because I think there's a lot more to go. There's a lot of other places you can go with that.
For me, that always like comes back to like the concept of psychological safety. So if you guys are familiar with that, like, so there's like the 4 stages of it and like different concepts and that kind of thing. But I think the point that you mentioned there too is right. It's like, it's the team versus individual, right? So, and I think that's kind of the thing when you talk about like inclusion safety, challenger safety, like these different things, like a lot of times it's like, and I think you see this a lot in high level sports where it's like, hey, you as the team needs to like do this, right? And it's like the team needs to figure it out and do that stuff. But it's like, for me, a lot of times it's the individual responsibility that like is more important than the team, right? So it's kind of like, so one of the things that I've like done with my girls is, it's like one of the things I tell them, it's like, if I ask them a question, like I want them to verbally respond, right? It's like, it's so awkward when it's like, you're like giving a presentation, you're doing stuff. It's like, does anyone have any questions? It's like, I'd rather you be like, no, this is the dumbest thing ever, than just sit there and say nothing. You know what I mean? From that standpoint. But it's like, because it's not psychologically safe. It's like, do you not have a question? Does this not make sense to you? Like that kind of thing. It's like, you can really develop this. And to your point, I think like this is a really like underappreciated, underdeveloped skill that you see a lot in the best teams, right? I think a lot of like different people have like different ways they frame it. Like our coaching staff here talks a lot about like the family relationship and having tough conversations. And that's kind of the thing that like I always go back to from our like, just challenging them, because it's not perfect and we're not perfect, but it's kind of one of those things where it's like, how can we build that? Right. And then the other thing that kind of made me think of is just the anti-fragility, right? So that kind of mindset for that from the standpoint of like, is this something that I want to inherently like, not just challenge me, right? So if I'm anti-fragile, it's not like I just embrace challenge really well, or I like can handle challenge really well. It's like, I seek out challenge and it makes me better, right? And that's kind of like, how can I do that individually? And then how can I do that as a team? But I think like a lot of that stuff, to your point, just those are all skills, right? It's like I can acquire those skills, I can develop those skills and kind of do that. So just kind of wanted to share that piece because I think it's pretty cool.
I feel like there's plenty of additional things we could continue to talk about and develop from this. That way is ultimately, I think this really outlines the importance of understanding psychological variables and psychological factors as it relates to sports performance. It's not just bigger, faster, stronger. It's not just put more weight on the bar. I went through it kind of thinking that's what this world was, and very quickly realized that there's a whole lot more to it. And at the end of the day, the brain, the nervous system is always listening. And that's the area that I found I'm able to have the most dramatic and quickest impacts with individuals is when we kind of shift our focus away from just building more horsepower or building a bigger engine, and instead kind of figure out what makes the engine run in the first place that way. Do the three of you have any kind of closing thoughts, closing remarks, or anything that we missed as we were discussing today? Because I feel like we covered a lot of different topics and, a lot of different things that way.
I think it's been interesting, Rob and AK, to hear your perspectives too on how, you guys are strength and conditioning coaches, but how you've kind of like tied in this psychological aspect and have like really emphasized that with the teams that you're training. I think that's so important. And I think that's kind of hopefully a shift that we're starting to see that's more widespread is people are having these conversations and becoming more aware of, not just the physical aspect and the importance of that in sport, but really the mental game too, because it impacts individuals, in my opinion, much more significantly than, the physical side. And obviously the two have to work together. But I think when we can have these, support systems like you guys who can be, acknowledging the impact of both and kind of and tying that into the training side, I think that's really important. And that's how we're going to start to see these changes.
I think that one of the things that I've pushed with volleyball specifically over just the last couple of weeks is that if you're chasing outcomes instead of living by your values, then you're stuck reacting to the world as it comes to you. You're not responding, right, in a way that makes sense. You're just stuck reacting to everything that happens to you because you're just chasing outcomes. But when you know what you value, right, when you have that internal intrinsic drive, or you have, whatever it is, what it is that you value in life, in sport, in whatever it is, it's a little bit easier to be responsive, right? And to be able to adapt and to be able to adjust and not just react because everything's happening to you. You're actually able to adjust to an environment that will be changing forever, probably. Like sport is chaos. I don't think there's one that I can think of that's just like this same thing will happen every time and there will be no variation and it's okay. You're safe. You poor baby. Like no, like get out of here. You have to be able to handle that chaos. And like I said, when we're just chasing outcomes, you're stuck in reactivity. And so I think that's one of the biggest things for me, and that I have come to value lately is just helping athletes. Again, like Rob said at the very beginning, when you develop relationships with them, finding out what matters, finding out truly what drives them, having connection as a result of that authenticity, and then helping them develop the courage to be able to be imperfect and use that to help drive outcomes in whatever it is that we're seeing on our side, and then helping them discover the things in life, in sport, whatever that they value, and pushing everything along in that direction, if that all kind of makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, that's me way more well-spoken than this ramble is about to be. Yeah, I just needed a second to kind of collect my thoughts here. Yeah, I agree with you guys. I mean, it's been really cool. I think this has been a really awesome episode from the standpoint of just everyone's unique perspective, right? It's just high level people, whether it's athletically or training or, from a physical therapy standpoint, there's all these different factors that kind of go in. But the thing that I kind of was thinking about throughout the process of the episode for me was just the soft skills, right? It's just kind of the soft skills of life and coaching and that kind of standpoint for me, where I just really think that's where you can develop the most. I think when you talk about athletics and doing stuff, it's, it's who's the best hitter, who's the fastest kid, who's the strongest kid, it's who, a lot of that is it's really important, but it's also I mean, the higher you go up, I mean, it's just so similar, I mean, it's everyone's really good, which is awesome, right? But I think just developing the other things, right? It's I talked a lot about psychological safety, relationship with challenge, doing stuff like that. I think that's really what separates not just athletes, but humans and people apart, right? It's kind of just developing those things. And one of the things I wanted to say earlier, but I couldn't remember exactly what this was related to, but I think it was something, I was reading this in a book recently. It was talking about the most, the challenges or things in life that are the most worth doing are the ones that are hard, right? It's kind of just we talked about comfort and being comfortable and doing stuff. And inherently, I just binged much of Squid Games yesterday. That didn't really get a ton out of that for me. You know what I mean? But it's that was a very comfortable thing for me to do as opposed to maybe getting some other work done or reading or whatever. But it's also probably wasn't a ton of inherent value for me, right? From that standpoint. But I also think that I always tell people, like, I think a lot of people are really interested in sport, right? And it's like a lot of my friends are engineers, a lot of people that I don't know out of athletics, they like, they're almost envious in a way. They're like, man, like your job is so cool. And I'm like, my job is really challenging, but it's also really rewarding because it is challenging. And I think that's something to inherently hit on. And I think for like anyone who's listening, whether it's an athlete, coach, human being, whoever, it's just to kind of like, look at that, like, where are you in that kind of like, that bandwidth or that kind of spectrum for those things, and just kind of reevaluate that as far as what you want kind of out of this life. So,
And for people who want to find out more about y'all online that way, where can they find y'all at on like social media and that sort of thing?
I'm inherently against most of it. I'm not going to lie to you. I have an Instagram.
Yeah, I feel like unfortunately I've just hit the age where like LinkedIn is my social media that I give people. I don't know what that means. Or my Google Scholar. Yikes. But yeah, I'm also on Instagram, Bri.Trudeau, or LinkedIn, Bri Trudeau.
Oh yeah, mine's just my name. It's literally just Ashley Kowalewski. Good luck spelling the last name.
I am not on LinkedIn or Google Scholar, so I apologize to everyone looking for that. Yeah, you can find me on Instagram at Strength Coach Rob. I said this before, but I was the OG, like Strength Coach Phil, Strength Coach Steve. They thought of it after me. You guys can also find me, like, I'm on the Penn State website, so you look up my email, shoot me an email from that standpoint. You can also find me on my own podcast, which is the Hot Takes Performance Podcast. So any of those platforms are awesome to reach.
That's awesome. We'll link to all of that in the description below. That way, you might catch those, or maybe you don't know how to spell Kowalewski. We got you covered there. So this was awesome. Really appreciate everyone's time today and insights. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Thanks, Dan.
Thanks, Dan.